Chapter 20 of Zhang Henshui's Golden Pink Family, passing on the dowry and returning the secret message, hiding in the flower stand and listening to the sweet voice with pride. Qingqiu opened a curtain and looked out, but it was her two classmates. One was Hu Juping and the other was Liu Yeping, both of whom had haircuts. Qingqiu waved through the glass and said, "Please come in and sit down. Please come in and sit down." Hua and Liu walked in. Mrs. Leng said a few polite words and walked away. Hua Juping said, "Miss Leng, how did you talk about haircutting? Do you also plan to cut your hair?" Qingqiu said, "No, I can't cut it myself, and others can't cut it well, so I have to spend $2 extra to go abroad. Went to the barber shop." Liu Yeping said, "Why bother? Look at what I look like. It was cut by Mishua and me. Do you think it's okay?" He tilted his head to show Qingqiu. Qingqiu said with a smile, "This is very good. Mishua will cut it with me." Hua Juping said, "Do you have Auntie's consent? Once this thing is cut, there is no way to reattach it." Qingqiu said, "Of course we've discussed it. If we don't discuss it, are we going to make things difficult for you?" Hua Juping said, "I still can't cut it. You don't have scissors to push your hair, nor do you have scissors to cut long hair. How do you just cut it? Just cut it with ordinary scissors, right?" Qingqiu said, "Please wait here. I'll ask someone to borrow it. I have a complete set of hair cutting tools." So he told Mother Han and asked her, "Go to Yanxi and tell him, and ask Yanxi to send someone to pick it up at home." Yanxi heard that Qingqiu wanted to get a haircut, so she quickly called back and went to borrow it with Yufan. She also said that she would need it immediately. Yufan didn't know what the purpose was, so she sent someone to deliver the things. This was originally contained in a carved, lacquered wooden box. Yanxi was so impatient that he didn't have time to see what was inside, so he sent someone to send the original box to Qingqiu. Mother Han then wanted to hand it to Qingqiu. Liu Yeping reached out and took it first, and said with a smile, "What a beautiful box. This must belong to a person who likes to decorate." After saying that, he opened the box and found an envelope on top. The envelope reads, "Lao Qi is smiling. Yufan is silent." Liu Yeping said, "Miss Leng, are you rank 7th? Who wrote this to you? How do you call it that?" The name of the person who wrote the letter is Yufan. She must be a woman. There is probably nothing to dislike. I want to open it and take a look. What does it say? Qingqiu knew that this letter was written to him by Yanxi's third sister-in-law, and the word Zhao Zanhan was clearly written on it, so there might be some joke in it. He quickly stretched out his hand to grab the letter, and said, "I haven't read it myself yet. Do you know whether the words in the letter can be made public?" Hua Juping said, "How does this person call you Lao Qi?" Qingqiu said, "This is an old classmate of mine. I worshipped my sister verbally, Lao Lia Lao 7, it was fun. I am just a person. How can I be ranked 7th? Qingqiu said, and put the letter on his body. Liu Yeping smiled and said, "In that case, we will also call you Lao Qi from now on." Qingqiu said, "Nonsense. It turns out that when people call me this name, I don't agree. How can I ask you to call me this name again? Stop making trouble. Just cut my hair." As he said this, he moved a square stool, sat down in front of the dressing table, stamped his feet on the ground, and said, "Come on, come on." Hua Juping said, "I told you to cut it off. I can't pick it up." Qingqiu said with a smile, "That's not possible. If you can cut it off, I want you to pick it up for me." Hua Juping looked at the wooden box and saw that there were all kinds of things for haircutting, and there are some things that I still don't know how to use. Then he asked, "Do you have a white cloth apron?" Qingqiu said, "We are not running a barber shop, so we need to be particular about it. Just wrap a piece around your neck. Why do you need a white cloth apron?" Hua Juping said, "What do you know? It doesn't matter whether you have a scarf or not, but the clothes must be wrapped with white cloth. Because the hair falls on the white cloth, it can be swept clean. Colored cloth can easily hide short hair." Qingqiu smiled and said, "You can't tell, but you have a lot of knowledge about haircutting." Then he opened the closet and found a piece of white bamboo cloth and gave it to Hua Juping. Hua Juping said, "This is not done yet. We still need a silk handkerchief to wrap around our neck." Qingqiu smiled and said, "The more you talk, the more you sound like an expert. This should encourage you. Which barber shop should you let? Please go and be a super barber." Hua Juping said with a smile, "If someone asks me, I will go. Being a laborer is not a despicable thing." Liu Yeping said, Let's just talk about it. After hearing this, Qingqiu turned away. Hua Zhuping put a white cloth on her, took off the silk handkerchief from the button, tied it around her neck, and then untied Qingqiu's hair. In his hand he held a pair of long-edged scissors, using the tip of the scissors. Draw a dotted line on the hair, then open the scissors, and put a lock of black silk hair that looks like running water into the mouth of the scissors. He smiled in the mirror and said, I'm going to cut it off now. After it's cut, there's no way to reattach it. Qingqiu said, How old are you now? You're so long-winded. You look like you're 7 or 80 years old. Hua Zhuping smiled and said, In that case, I'll start cutting it. After he said it, he heard the scissors squeaking a few times and cut off a lock of hair. Then he picked up the hair clippers and fixed her short hair. In less than half an hour, the hair was cut. Liu Yeping said with a smile, Miss Leng, she is already very beautiful. This haircut makes her even more playful. Qingqiu held a small, long-handled mirror and looked at the back of her head. Then she turned sideways and looked at the large mirror in front of her. They each looked at it for a few times, and said with a smile, Sure enough, the hair is cut very well. I heard that the hair can be cut in various colors. What is its name? Hua Zhuping said, The name is so good, and the color is called wearing the thin moon style. Qingqiu said with a smile, Don't be too happy. People who don't get a haircut will be called a haystack and a duck's ass. Liu Yeping said, Miss Leng, you have a new haircut today. It's a commemoration. You should take a photo. Qingqiu said, What's this big deal? It's worth commemorating. Hua Zhuping said, Although it doesn't need to be commemorated, you do look better after cutting your hair. You finally changed your look. Why don't you take a picture and see for yourself? Qingqiu couldn't resist their instigation, so he and she went to the photo studio to take a picture. After I came back from taking pictures, I opened the letter I received first and took a look. The letter read, Why did you borrow the hair scissors? And wait, does your good girlfriend want a haircut? Sister Shuju is here. What she said about you was a complete misunderstanding, and she hates Meng Leng very much. Are you willing to make peace with her? If you are willing, I would like to be a peacemaker and treat you two to a small restaurant. Miss Wuer is coming too. You can ask her to accompany you. I think if you want to hang up that sign of respecting women's rights, I'm afraid you'll be embarrassed not to come, right? By the way, I'm trying to rip you off a little. When you come back, bring back some of Yan Bingzai's sour plum soup. Sincerely, Brother Yanxi. Jade Pen Qingqiu read this letter and became confused. I thought to myself that I had never heard Yanxi say that there was a sister Shuju. Looking at what this letter said, it seemed that the relationship between the two was not an easy one. Moreover, this relationship is very public and not hidden from the family. Isn't this strange? But Miss Wuer is also mentioned in it. Isn't she the person I met in the cinema? Holding the letter in his hand, he bit his lower lip and thought deeply. At first, I wanted to throw away this letter, lest Yanxi go home and reconcile with some sister Shuju. I turned around and thought, this is not right. Since his third sister-in-law has written to him, she must be looking forward to his return. If he doesn't go back and asks about it, he will say that he didn't receive the letter. It's obvious that I hid the letter. It seemed that I was not generous in doing so. I pretended not to know, and still put the letter inside to see how he did. So he sealed the letter and put it in the box, and said to Mother Han, when you gave the box to Master Jin, you told him that there was a letter in it. I think he didn't know about it, because the letter was sealed. Yes, we still put it inside. We don't dare to throw it away. When Han Ma returned the box to Yanxi, she naturally said it again. Yanxi was also very surprised and thought, how could he get a letter? I opened the letter and took a look. Fortunately, there was no mention of this matter. However, she became confused again. Qingqiu could not let Qingqiu see the words above. If she saw it, she would not understand the reason behind it, and many misunderstandings would definitely occur. And she didn't see it. If I had to explain it to her, she would inevitably have doubts. If she saw it, I would explain to her and reveal her secret, which would be really difficult to handle. Regardless of whether she saw it or not, it would be best if I didn't go home today. Then it would have nothing to do with the appointment in the letter, and her suspicion would be solved. Yanxi thought this way, so that afternoon, he got a flute and blew it from time to time, deliberately letting Qingqiu hear it, to show that he was not going out. Unexpectedly, at 4 o'clock, Miley called and said with a smile, Brother Qi, come back soon. Something happened to you. Yanxi was shocked when she heard this. Asked, "What happened?" Miley said, "Dad suddenly remembered this incident." "What do you guess it is?" Yanxi said, "I can't guess it. Please tell me what it is." "What happened?" Miley said, "I don't know. I just saw that my father was very angry and told me to call you and tell you to come back soon." Yanxi said, "You are wronging me to come back." "Yes. Are you afraid that I don't know?" Miley said, "Aunt Kui is here. Please ask her to talk to you." "Do you think I'm lying?" At this point, the phone stopped for a moment and was changed. A person, indeed Aunt Kui's voice, said, "Come back. An ugly daughter-in-law always has to see her parents-in-law. If you can hide from her today, can you hide for the rest of your life?" After hearing this, Yanxi became more and more anxious and asked, "What on earth is going on? You should know something." Aunt Kui said, "I just came back. How could I know? If you come back, you will probably get scolded a few times. Is there anything else going on?" After that it was all ready. He smiled and hung up the phone. There were 3 sets of telephones in Yanxi's house, with more than 10 plugs. He didn't ask which house the call came from. He called home because he was afraid that his father would find out, which would make things worse. He walked up and down the corridor with his hands behind his back, turning around a few times. He thought, "What's the matter? If it's about the Leng family, I wouldn't let my father know about it. Or maybe I paid 500 yuan to my father's account last week, and my father would know about it. But it's also a small matter, and I won't let him know about it." So angry, Yanxi wandered around alone for a long time, not knowing what to do. What Aunt Kui said is true. An ugly daughter-in-law always has to see her parents-in-law, and she can't hide them forever. If I don't go back, there will always be a knot in my heart. This time, no matter how big or small it is, a mystery will always be revealed. Thinking this to myself, I was worried about Qingqiu's level, so I threw it away. I immediately got in the car and went home. When I got home, I didn't go to see my father first. I sat in my study for a while and called an old lady to find Miley. The old lady went away for a while and then came back and said, "Miss 8 is in my wife's room, and the Prime Minister is also there. The Prime Minister heard that Master 7 is back and asked you to go." This forced Yanxi to go. I had to walk slowly towards my mother. When I walked into the house, I saw Jin Quan lying on the couch with a cigar in his mouth. Miley was holding a book and sitting on the side, as if she was telling Jin Quan about the book. As soon as Miley raised her head, she smiled and said, "Brother Qi is back." When Jin Quan heard that, he sat up and turned his face to Mrs. Jin and said, "I don't know what Qi is doing outside. I'm not very good at all. I saw him." Mrs. Jin said, "Didn't you ask him to start a poetry club outside? Why do you ask me?" Jin Quan said, "I asked him to ask about it today." At this moment, she was just beating gongs and drums in her heart, not knowing what punishment her father would have. Not daring to sit down for the time being, he used his hands to clean up the pot of cattails on the long desk. Mrs. Jin smiled and said, 3 months ago, you said you wanted to read the poems in their poetry club. Didn't you remember it until today?" Jin Quan smiled and said, "I am very busy. How can I have time to ask them? What about those other things?" When I was cleaning out some old documents, I saw a book of poems he sent. Except for 1 or 2 people, the rest were all nonsense. His tone turned out to be about that volume of poems and had nothing to do with other issues. Only then did a stone fall in his heart. He smiled and said, "We were originally learning to compose poems. As long as they are somewhat similar in form, how can we talk about good and bad now?" Jin Quan said, "Of course that is the case, but these poems don't even have similar forms. It's very sour and unpleasant to watch." Mrs. Jin said, "How is Qi doing?" Jin Quan didn't know that Song Runking was the one who created his masterpiece, so he smiled slightly and said, "I do understand the rules. If you want it to be good, you need to study it. But what I mean is that I want him to study Chinese language. After all, things like poems and chapters are just for describing temperament, so I can just learn it casually. He pretends not to study, so he is asked to study Chinese at home. I don't think he has picked up many books in the past 6 months." At this point, his expression slowly became serious. Then he said, "Looking like this, it is better to go to school. After all, I still have a name. I think it is better to go to school in the second half of the year. I don't think there is any need for that poetry club." I really want to hang out with a few people who understand literature and ink. That's okay. But there's no need to make a big deal out of renting a house and setting up a community, which is a lot of money. There are many empty houses at home. Isn't it enough to just carve out a few houses? Yanxi was undecided and said yes. Jin Quan said, "You have been making such a fuss for a while to establish a poetry club. Is this the result you have achieved in the past few months?" Yanxi said, "There are still many manuscripts that have not been brought." If Jin Quan frowned and said, "Forget it, you think I like to read such words, so there is no need to bring them." Yanxi was eager for her father to say this, and immediately thought of a way out, so she asked Mrs. Jin, "Is third brother back? I have something to ask him." Mrs. Jin said, "I don't know. I'm afraid she's not at home." Yanxi said, "I'll go take a look." She turned around and walked out. As soon as he walked to the screen door, he saw Aunt Kui leaning on the column in the corridor, waving to him. Yanxi walked over and asked, "What's the matter?" Aunt Kui looked at Yanxi and said with a smile, "What have you been doing outside? Did your father scold you?" "Yanxi, you didn't scold me." Aunt Kui said, "You added 1,000 yuan to my father's account. Doesn't he know?" Yanxi smiled and said, "Where can I get this money? It's only 500 yuan. That's all. Dad doesn't know yet. I plan to return this piece within a month or two without anyone noticing." "How did Aunt Kui know that I had moved the money?" Aunt Kui said with a smile, "I was in the accounting room the day before yesterday. I saw your 2 receipts. Mr. Chai stuffed your 2 receipts into the safe like a chicken claw. I was very suspicious. Why did you come to the house?" "To collect the payment. It must have been discussed with Mr. Chai to transfer the old man's money. As for how much, I don't know. I just made a guess." Yanxi smiled and said, "Please keep this matter a secret. Don't tell me. My credit will be ruined, and I won't be able to do anything in the future." Aunt Kui said, "You don't have any big use, so why are you causing a loss? What did you do outside? You should tell me as soon as possible. If there is any problem in the future, I can cover it up for you." Yanxi said with a smile, "Of course there is a little thing that others want to hide, but I won't hide it from Aunt Kui and the 5th and 6th sisters. There is no need to say it before it's time to publish it." Aunt Kui said with a smile, "Humph, even if you don't tell me, I know a little bit. I'll just watch." Yanxi smiled and walked away proudly. Because Yufan had written to him, asking him to come back, and now that he was back, he could do her a favor and go see her, which would make him appear to have been called back. So he made a detour, turned around the side of the Morning Glory fence, and looked inside to see what they were doing. In the middle of the yard, he saw a small round marble table, and Yufan and Bai Shuju were each lying on a rattan chair. Shuju said with a smile, "Cousin, your glass of soda has been sitting for too long, the flavor has all gone, and it doesn't taste good anymore." Yufan said, "I drank a glass first, and I dare not drink anymore, for fear of getting a stomach upset." Shuju said, "It's just that I don't want to drink soda, but what about the cold shredded chicken I had for lunch just now? It's cooked." Yufan said, "Although it was cooked, the cook also chilled it with ice cubes before serving it." Shuju said, "You always like to eat cold food. Why don't you eat it at all? Do you avoid raw and cold food?" Yufan said, with a smile, "Yes, I avoid raw and cold food today. As a girl, why do you pay attention to these things?" Shuju stood up, holding the glass in her hand, and said to Yufan with a smile, "I'm going to throw it at you." Yufan said, "No wonder you let it slip, and you can't blame me." Shuju said, "You have a powerful mouth. No wonder your third brother is so scared of you when he sees you." Yufan said with a smile, "Don't talk nonsense. We are a loving couple. We can't be like others who are not married yet, and are affectionate and stick together like honey one moment, and then become enemies the next moment when they are angry." Shuju said, with a stern face, "Don't say that. It's not right. If you say that again, I will be really anxious." Yufan stood up and said with a smile, "You girl, you are getting worse and worse. You want to use me, but you are unwilling to tell the truth in front of me, and you always put on airs. Don't you know that your cousin is really infatuated and wants to promote your good things? Do you think I said these things on purpose to make fun of you?" Shuja put down the glass, lay on the rattan chair, turned her face away, and said, "Who will listen to your crazy talk?" Yufan said, "Is this crazy talk? Well, don't beg me in the future." At this point, she poured half a cup of soda in the glass onto the Morning Glory frame. This splash was not biased, and it splashed on Yanxi's face behind the leaves. Yanxi was startled by the cold soda and cried out in pain. Yufan asked, "Who is hiding there?" Yanxi took out his handkerchief and wiped his face while walking out, saying with a smile, "I didn't mean to eavesdrop on you. I saw you sitting here chatting when I walked outside the fence. I didn't know who was coming, so I looked around first, and then you did this to me." Yufan said, "Seventh Master, you are really wronging me. I really didn't know where you were. I don't know how it happened that I splashed it on your face." Yanxi turned around and saw Shuju wearing a short-sleeved, water-red gauze gown with 2 pairs of arms as white as lotus roots, all exposed, so he smiled and said, "Miss Bai, when did you come?" Bai Shuju thought that what she had just said to Yufan was heard by others, and she felt a little embarrassed. She had already taken out a small silk handkerchief 7 inches square from her chest bag, spread it on her face, and pretended to sleep on the rattan chair with her face tilted up to the sky. Her eyes were open inside the handkerchief, peeking at Yanxi. She felt even more embarrassed when she saw him staring at her intently. At this time, Yanxi asked her a question, but she couldn't bear to ignore it. She took off her handkerchief, leaned up, and said with a smile, "I'm sorry, I didn't know it was Master Qi." After saying that, she stood up and was about to leave. Yufan stretched out her hands to block her way, and said with a smile, "Where are you going?" Shuju said, "Go to the house to wipe your face." Yufan smiled and said, "You are so old now, don't play hide and seek like a child. If you want to wipe your face, I'll ask them to scoop a basin of water. Why go away?" Bai Shuju was stopped by her and had to sit down. Yufan called Qingqiu and brought a rattan chair. "Let Yanxi sit down." Yufan said, with a smile, "I thought you might not come after I sent that letter, but you really showed me your favor and came." Yanxi said, with a smile, "What are you talking about? Am I really ignorant of the status quo? My sister-in-law asked me to come, and I have to show my favor by coming." Yufan glanced at Shuju, and something came to her lips, but she held it back. Then she thought for a while, and said with a smile, "That's not what I meant. It's because you are very busy. It's not easy for you to take time to come back." Yanxi said with a smile, "That's more of a scolding to me. Everyone knows that I am the most idle person. How can I be busy?" Yufan said with a smile, "The more idle you are, the busier you are. When you are the most idle, I am afraid that I can't even find your shadow." Shuju heard this, and sat there with her lips pursed and smiled. Yanxi said, "If you describe me like this, I'm a jobless vagrant." Yufan was about to say something, but Qingqiu came in and said, "There's a phone call. Please ask the third young lady to talk." Yufan stood up and said to Yanxi with a smile, "Please sit down and entertain the guests for me, I'll come." Yufan didn't say hello, so Yanxi didn't pay attention. Since she had explained that she was going to entertain the guests here, if she sat still, she would feel a little embarrassed. He smiled and said, "Did you call me back just to entertain the guests?" Yufan had already reached the steps, turned around and smiled, "Of course." After that, she went into the house. Yanxi saw Shuju was silent and stepped on the grass on the ground. He wanted to ask her a question, to talk to her, so as not to feel embarrassed sitting opposite her. Because someone said to himself, or were said he would come, why didn't he come? As he spoke, he reached out and took out a small silver box from his body, took out a cigarette, and puffed on the lid of the box twice. After a long while, she thought for a moment and said with a smile, "Miss Bai, would you like to have a cigarette for fun?" Shuju was staring at the colorful flowers of porcelain on the ground, and was just in a daze. At this time, Yanxi invited her to smoke, and then she raised her head and puffed her cheeks and said, "Thank you, I don't smoke." Yanxi smiled, "Miss Bai, are you still angry with me?" Shuju said, "I dare not." Yanxi smiled, "This is what you look like when you are angry. How can you say you dare not?" Shuju couldn't help laughing, and said, "What other looks are there when you are angry? I just heard it." After this smile, the two of them forgot about the big storm when they drew their swords and swung their knives. Shuju held the soda bottle and said with a smile, "Would you like to drink some soda?" Yanxi said, "If you hadn't mentioned this, I would have forgotten it. Third sister-in-law asked me to buy sour plum soup, but I forgot about it." Shuju said, "Since you came back because she asked you to, why did you forget this special request?" Yanxi looked into the room and saw that no one came out, so he asked Shuju, "Didn't you say that she doesn't like raw and cold food?" Why did you ask me to bring sour plum soup? Shuzhu blushed and said, who talked to you about this? Don't say this. Yanxi deliberately acted very strange, so he asked, why can't you say this? Shuzhu smiled and said, I don't know, Sister Yufan doesn't allow me to say it. As she said this, she turned her head to look at the flowers, shrugging her shoulders and laughing. Yanxi said, why are you hiding when we are talking? After saying this, he stood up and walked around in front of Shuzhu, making sure to see her face. Shuzhu took out the small silk handkerchief again, covered her face with it, twisted her body, and said with a smile, don't make trouble, Sister Yufan will come out soon. Seeing Shuzhu like this, Yanxi became more and more tender and could not control himself. There was a sound of the curtain snapping, and Yufan was already standing on the corridor, looking at Shuzhu, then at Yanxi, pursing her lips and smiling. Then he nodded slightly to the two of them, and then slowly walked to the middle of the yard. Yin said to Shuzhu, you two are finally fine. Don't be angry again in the future. If you are angry again, I will embarrass you too. You are so old, crying for a while, laughing for a while. What's the meaning? Yanxi heard it, just smiled stupidly. Shuzhu said, cousin, your words are really bad. You need to correct them, or you will go to hell of tongue pulling in the future. Yufan said, listen, this is what Miss Wenming said, and she even brought up hell of tongue pulling. Yanxi laughed. I had no choice but to say this to scare you. People who know how to talk wouldn't be like that. Yufan laughed. Great, you two are working together. It turns out that the awkwardness was all fake. At this point, Paifeng came over and laughed. I heard you laughing and talking over there, making a mess, so happy. There were only 3 people here, but from a distance it sounded like an army of thousands. Yufan smiled and said, it's good that you're here. We are short of 3 people here, so come and make up for it. Let's play for rounds, okay? Paifeng said, it's so hot, let's take a break from the heat. What cards are we playing? Yufan said, I'll ask them to pull an electric wire from the house and hang a lamp in the yard, and then we can play in the yard. Isn't that good? Paifeng said, that's even worse. Once there's a lamp in the yard, all the insects in the flowers and grass will come. They'll pounce on people, making them dirty and itchy, and we won't be able to play around. Yufan said, it doesn't matter if you play in the room. Just put a big fan in the room, and it won't be too hot. Paifeng smiled and said, why are you so happy today? Yufan looked at Shuzhu and Yanxi and said, I succeeded in being the peacemaker for them. What a great honor. Shouldn't I be happy? Paifeng smiled and said, you are really bothering with your own business. I am afraid that others will not be well. I was afraid that they would have been well behind our backs a long time ago. They have been well many times. Yufan smiled and said, you are another one who deserves to be sent to the hell of tongue pulling. She asked Shuzhu, listen, you say I have no moral integrity, but how are others compared to me? Shuzhu said, you are not a man of integrity. You are all the same. This is your family. I dare not compete with you. You can say what I want. Paifeng patted Shuzhu's shoulder and said with a smile, my 7th sister-in-law is much better than my 3rd sister-in-law. There are older and younger ones. Do you really care about a few jokes made by me as the eldest sister-in-law? Shuzhu said with a smile, Grandma, stop making fun of us. Do you really bully me because I am a child of a different surname? Paifeng said with a smile, you are so pitiful. I won't say anything to you. Wait, I will take the money. You don't have to play big cards, but I want to play with cash. Paifeng said, and turned back to the room to get the money. Unexpectedly, when she entered the room, she caused a huge disaster. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.